The wind was a blade against Silwin's skin, each gust a fresh slice through the threadbare wool of her cloak. Snow, driven into a horizontal frenzy, stung her face and blinded her eyes, which were already a source of shame. Pale red, they were the mark of the curse, the outward sign of the flaw that ran bone deep. She was an albino, a ghost in a world of vibrant color and fierce strength. Her wolf, a creature as pale and frail as she was, shivered somewhere deep inside her, a pathetic whimper against the storm's roar. Death, she thought with a strange sense of calm, would feel like this, just a slow, creeping cold until everything simply stopped. It had been 3 days since Lord Valyrias had cast her out, not just rejected her, but publicly renounced her in the great hall before the entire Blackwood pack. The memory was a shard of ice lodged in her heart, colder than the blizzard that now sought to claim her. She could still see the sneer on his handsome face, the way his eyes, the color of warm amber, had turned to chips of flint when they landed on her. He had been her fated mate, a truth the moon goddess had whispered to her soul the moment he came of age. For years, she had hidden in the shadows of the pack house, a secret shame her parents had died trying to protect, dreaming of the day her mate would find her and her life would finally begin. But her life had not begun. It had ended. He had dragged her from the kitchens, where she toiled in obscurity, and thrown her onto the dais. This? He had spat, his voice ringing with disgust. The goddess gifts me with this pale, weak-limbed curse, an omega with the fur of a corpse and the eyes of a demon. The pack had laughed. Some had jeered. Cyrilda, the beta's daughter with hair like spun gold and a heart full of ambition, had smiled a triumphant, vicious little smile from his side. He had chosen Cyrilda, a politically advantageous match, over the weakling fate had handed him. I, Lord Valyrias, reject Silwin of no name as my mate, he had declared, the words of the rite a formal, brutal severing. The bond, which had been a faint, hopeful warmth inside her, had snapped. The pain was indescribable, a physical agony that had sent her to her knees, clutching her chest as if her heart had been ripped from her body. It felt like a part of her soul had been cauterized, leaving behind only scar tissue and a hollow echo where hope used to live. He had ordered her exiled, to be driven from their lands before the next moonrise, lest her cursed presence bring ill fortune upon them all. So she had fled, with nothing but the clothes on her back and the ghost of a connection that now felt like a phantom limb, aching with loss. Now, the ache was a dull throb beneath the overwhelming cold. She stumbled, her frozen boots catching on a hidden root. She fell face first into a snowdrift, the impact jarring her teeth. For a moment, she simply lay there, the snow, a surprisingly soft blanket. It would be so easy to close her eyes, so easy to let the storm take her. No more pain, no more rejection, no more being the ghost everyone stared at or whispered about. Just peace, just silence. But somewhere, a flicker of defiance remained. Her mother, Alindra, had always told her that her unique form was a gift, not a curse, a blessing from the moon itself. Silwin had stopped believing those words long ago, but the memory of her mother's warm hand on her cheek was enough to make her push herself up. She forced her frozen limbs to move, pushing through the deep snow with a desperation born of pure instinct. She knew of an old hunter's cabin a little further into the woods, abandoned for years. If she could just reach it, she might survive the night. The thought was a tiny ember in the frozen landscape of her despair. One more step, then another. The world had shrunk to the space directly in front of her feet, a swirling vortex of white. It was the scent that stopped her. Blood, hot, and metallic. It cut through the frozen air, a shocking, primal smell that bypassed her frozen senses and hit her wolf directly. It was the smell of a fresh kill, or a fresh wound. Her first instinct was fear. Rogues often hunted in storms like this, their savagery amplified by the chaos of the elements. She should run, she should hide. But another scent was mingled with the blood, a scent of ozone and ancient pines, of power so immense it made the air crackle. It was lupine, but unlike any wolf she had ever smelled. It was royal. Curiosity, a dangerous and long-dormant trait, warred with her instinct for self-preservation. She took a hesitant step toward the scent, her pale eyes straining to see through the blizzard. And then she saw it. A splash of darkness against the blinding white. No, not darkness, a tangle of it. 3 large, mangy wolves, their fur matted with snow and gore, were circling something on the ground. Rogues. Vicious, packless creatures that lived only for violence. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She should leave. Now, this was not her fight. But then the rogues shifted, and she saw what they had cornered. It was a wolf. A colossal wolf. Its fur the color of pure, untainted silver. So pale it was almost white, like moonlight given form. It was bleeding heavily from a deep gash on its flank, and its leg was bent at an unnatural angle. Despite its injuries, it radiated an aura of raw, untamed power that made the air thick. It met the rogues snarling with a low, rumbling growl of its own, a sound that seemed to vibrate in Silwin's very bones. One of the rogues lunged. The silver wolf met the attack with astonishing speed, its jaws clamping down on the rogue's throat with a sickening crunch. It tossed the dead wolf aside as if it were a toy, but the effort cost it. It staggered, its injured leg giving way, and another rogue took the opportunity to leap onto its back, claws and teeth tearing at its magnificent coat. Silwin did not know what came over her. Perhaps it was the sight of this beautiful, powerful creature being brought down by scavengers. Perhaps it was a flicker of empathy for a fellow creature in pain. Or perhaps, in the depths of her despair, she had simply stopped caring about her own survival. Without thinking, she grabbed a heavy, fallen branch, its wood frozen and solid as iron. With a scream that was torn from her throat, a sound of pure, desperate rage, she charged. The remaining 2 rogues turned, surprised by this sudden, ghostly apparition emerging from the blizzard. They saw a slip of a girl, white-haired and wild-eyed, brandishing a branch like a club. They saw prey, not a threat. One of them, the larger of the 2, dismissed the silver wolf and bounded toward her, its lips curled back in a hungry snarl. Silwin swung the branch with all the strength she possessed. It connected with the side of the rogue's head with a dull thud. The creature yelped more in surprise than pain, shaking its head. It lunged for her throat. She knew, in that split second, that she was dead. She closed her eyes, bracing for the inevitable. But the killing bite never came. She heard a savage roar, a sound of fury so profound it shook the very trees. She opened her eyes to see the great silver wolf, a tempest of white fur and righteous anger, standing over her. It had thrown the other rogue from its back, and had intercepted the one attacking her. Its jaws were locked around the rogue's neck, and with a final, brutal twist, it ended the fight. The last rogue, seeing its packmates fall, tucked its tail and fled into the swirling snow. Silence descended, broken only by the howl of the wind and the labored breathing of the silver wolf. It stood over her for a moment, a guardian forged from moonlight and ice. Then, its strength gave out. It collapsed into the snow, its great body shuddering, a low whine escaping its throat. Its eyes, the color of liquid silver, found hers. They were filled with pain, but also with a shocking intelligence, an awareness. Silwin scrambled to her feet, her own terror forgotten. She knelt beside the magnificent creature, her hands hovering over its wounded flank. The gash was deep, oozing dark blood that stained the snow crimson. "You saved me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "After I did nothing." The wolf just watched her, its silver gaze unwavering. It had protected her, the worthless Omega, the curse. No one had ever protected her before. A wave of determination washed over her, extinguishing the last embers of her despair. She would not let this creature die. It had fought for her. Now, she would fight for it. "The cabin," she said, more to herself than to the wolf. "It's not far. We have to get you there." How she would move a creature easily twice her weight, she had no idea. But she had to try. She wrapped her arms around its massive chest, trying to heave it up. It was like trying to move the mountain. The wolf let out a pained groan, but it seemed to understand. It struggled, using its front legs to push itself forward as she pulled. Together, they began the agonizingly slow journey through the deepening snow. Every step was a battle. The wind tore at them, the cold seeped into their bones, and the wolf's blood left a stark, grim trail behind them. Silwin's muscles screamed, her lungs burned, but she did not stop. She focused on the wolf's silver eyes, on the silent trust she saw there, and she pulled. It felt like an eternity later when the dark shape of the cabin finally loomed out of the white haze. It was little more than a one-room hovel, its timbers warped and gray, but it was shelter. With one last, desperate surge of strength, she half-dragged, half-pushed the wolf over the threshold and kicked the flimsy door shut against the storm. The sudden silence was deafening. The cabin was frigid, but at least it was dry. There was a small stone fireplace and, miraculously, a small pile of dry wood left by the last occupant. Her hands were numb and clumsy, but she managed to strike a spark from the flint and steel in her small pouch. A tiny flame flickered to life, catching on the dry kindling. Slowly, painstakingly, she built it into a small, life-giving fire. Warmth began to creep back into the small space. Silwin turned her attention back to the wolf. It lay on the floor, shivering, its breathing shallow. She gently tore a strip from the hem of her already ragged tunic and used it to clean the wound on its flank as best she could with melted snow. The gash was deeper than she had thought, likely poisoned by the rogue's filthy claws. She had no herbs, no salves, nothing to treat it. All she could offer was warmth and her own meager presence. She huddled beside the great wolf, sharing the heat from the fire. She reached out a trembling hand and laid it on its massive head, her fingers sinking into the thick, soft fur. The wolf did not flinch. Instead, it leaned into her touch, letting out a soft sigh. Its silver eyes closed. As the storm raged outside, Silwin began to talk. She spoke to the unconscious wolf, her voice a low, broken whisper in the firelit gloom. She told it everything, about her pale hair and eyes, about the whispers and the stares, about her parents' shame. She told it about Lord Valyrias, about the hope and the crushing rejection. "He said I was a curse," she murmured, tears freezing on her cheeks. "That I was broken. And he was right. I am. I'm just a worthless ghost Omega. No one could ever." Her voice broke. She curled closer to the wolf's warm body, confessing all the pain and loneliness she had kept locked inside for a lifetime. She didn't know why she was telling this animal her secrets, only that in its silent presence, she felt a flicker of safety she hadn't felt in years. Eventually, exhausted and emotionally spent, she fell into a fitful sleep, her small hand still resting on the silver wolf's head. Silwin awoke to an unfamiliar silence. The wind had died. Sunlight, pale and watery, streamed through the grimy window of the cabin. For a moment, she was disoriented, the events of the previous night feeling like a fever dream. Then she remembered. The wolf. She sat up with a gasp, her eyes searching the small room. He was gone. The spot where he had lain was empty, save for a few strands of silver fur and a dark stain on the floorboards where his blood had dried. A hollow ache, sharper and more painful than she expected, bloomed in her chest. Of course he had left. He was a wild creature, powerful and free. He had no reason to stay with her. Still, a part of her had foolishly hoped. She had saved him, and he had saved her. She had thought, for a few hours, that she had found a companion in her solitude. But she was alone again, always alone. A sound from outside broke her reverie. Voices, deep and commanding. And the sound of many paws crunching on fresh snow. Fear, cold and immediate, seized her. Rogues? Had the last one returned with a new pack? Or was it Valyrias' trackers, sent to ensure she had truly left their territory? She scrambled to her feet, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She looked around the tiny cabin for a weapon, for an escape, but there was nowhere to go. The flimsy door creaked open. Silwin flattened herself against the far wall, trying to make herself as small as possible. A man stepped inside, ducking his head to clear the low frame. He was enormous, clad in dark leather armor trimmed with silver, a heavy winter cloak draped over his broad shoulders. His face was stern, framed by a thick, dark beard, and his eyes scanned the cabin with sharp, intelligent authority. Behind him, more men, all dressed in the same uniform, fanned out, their expressions grim and alert. These were not rogues. They were warriors, highly trained, an elite guard. The man in the lead, who wore the insignia of a beta on his armor, took another step into the room. His eyes landed on the bloodstain on the floor, then on the few strands of silver fur. His gaze snapped to her, and his eyes widened in shock. "By the goddess," he breathed. Silwin flinched, expecting an accusation, a blow. She was trespassing. They would surely kill her for it. I'm sorry," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "I was just seeking shelter from the storm. I'll leave now." The beta, Gideon, ignored her words. He looked past her, his eyes fixed on something behind her. A shadow fell over her. Silwin turned slowly, her blood running cold. A man stood there, where the wolf had been just moments before. He had appeared as silently as the morning mist. He was tall, impossibly so, with shoulders that seemed to block out the light from the door. His hair was the color of freshly fallen snow, a startling, pure white that cascaded over his shoulders. But it was his eyes that held her captive. They were the same eyes, the color of liquid silver, intelligent and ancient, and they were fixed on her with an intensity that stole her breath. He was naked to the waist, his torso a landscape of pale, corded muscle and old, silvery scars. A fresh, crudely cleaned wound marred the perfection of his flank. The beta and all the guards immediately dropped to one knee, their heads bowed in reverence. "Your Majesty," Gideon said, his voice thick with relief. "We tracked the assassin's trail. We feared the worst." "Majesty, King?" Silwin's mind struggled to comprehend. The wolf, the man, he was a king? Her gaze darted from the kneeling guards to the silver-eyed man. He took a step toward her, and she flinched back, pressing herself harder against the wall. This was a nightmare. She had stumbled into the affairs of royalty. They would kill her for simply seeing him in such a vulnerable state. "It is all right," the man said. His voice was a low, resonant baritone, a sound like stones shifting in a deep riverbed. It was a voice that commanded armies and calmed storms. It was a voice that held absolute authority. "She is the one who saved me." He was looking only at her, his silver eyes gentle, yet piercing, as if they could see straight into the broken, hollow places of her soul. He took another step, closing the distance between them. He was so close now she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. He reached out a hand, not to strike her, but to gently cup her cheek. His touch was warm, sending a jolt of shocking, unfamiliar energy through her. And then he spoke the word that shattered her world and rebuilt it in a single, heart-stopping moment. "Mate." The word hung in the air, electric and absolute. Silwin stared at him, her mind a complete blank. It was impossible. A trick of the ear, a delusion brought on by cold and starvation. Kings did not have mates like her. Alphas, especially one who commanded such power that hardened warriors knelt at his mere presence, were not mated to cursed, rejected omegas. "No," she whispered, the word fragile and broken. She shook her head, pulling away from his touch as if it burned. "You are mistaken. It cannot be." His silver eyes softened with something that looked impossibly like understanding. "The moon goddess does not make mistakes," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "I am King Theren of the Shadow Wolf Pack, and you, little storm-braved warrior, are my mate. King Theren, the Shadow Wolf King, a living legend, a king so powerful his territory spanned half the continent, a ruler whispered to be as formidable and merciless as the winter itself, and he was albino, just like her. His hair was the same, startling white, his skin the same pale alabaster, but where her features were seen as a curse, a mark of weakness, on him they were ethereal, divine. He wore his paleness like a crown of moonlight. "I am nothing," she choked out, backing away until she hit the wall again. The guards were still kneeling, their faces carefully averted, but she could feel their shock. "I am Silwin, an Omega. I was rejected, cast out. I have no pack, no name. I am broken." She gestured to her own face, her pale hair. "I am a curse. Your people would never accept me." Theron's expression hardened, but the anger was not directed at her. "What fool would cast away a treasure like you?" he growled, the sound vibrating through the small cabin. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and she felt stripped bare. He saw not the cursed albino, but the girl who had charged a pack of rogues with a tree branch. He saw the person who had shared her last bit of warmth with a dying animal. "Broken?" he said, his voice dropping again, becoming intimate and compelling. "I was bleeding to death in the snow, and you dragged me to safety. I was defenseless, and you fought for me. You tended my wounds and warmed me with your own body. I felt your spirit, Silwin. It is not broken. It is the strongest, purest thing I have ever encountered. The compassion in you is a queen's strength, not an Omega's weakness." He took her hand, his large, warm fingers enclosing her small, cold ones. A current, a living spark of energy, flowed between them. It was the bond, faint but undeniable, trying to mend the wound Valyrias had left. It felt like warmth seeping into a place that had been frozen for a lifetime. "I have waited centuries for a mate with a heart like yours," he continued, his silver eyes searching hers. "Do you truly believe I would let you go, now that I have found you?" Before she could answer, before she could voice the 1,000 protests and fears screaming in her mind, he turned to his beta. "Gideon," he commanded, his kingly authority returning in full force. "This is Silwin, my mate. She is your future queen. You will show her every respect and courtesy. Prepare the escort. We are returning to the citadel immediately." Gideon rose to his feet, his face a mask of disciplined professionalism, but his eyes, when they met Silwin's, held a new light of awe and respect. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing his head deeply, this time to her. The other guards followed suit, a dozen heavily armed warriors bowing to the girl who, only yesterday, had been ready to die in the snow. Silwin felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. Queen. It was a title so far beyond her comprehension that it sounded like a foreign word. She was swept up in a whirlwind of activity. One of the guards draped a thick, fur-lined cloak around her shoulders, its warmth a shocking luxury. Another offered her a water skin and a piece of dried meat, which she devoured with a hunger that shamed her. King Tharen himself shifted back into his magnificent wolf form, his injuries already healing at an accelerated rate, thanks to the nascent mate bond and his own formidable power. He nudged her gently with his head, a clear invitation. Hesitantly, she allowed Gideon to help her onto the great wolf's back. Settling into his thick, soft fur felt surreal. The king of all werewolves was carrying her, the rejected Omega, as if she were the most precious cargo in the world. As they set off, his pack of warriors forming a protective circle around them, Silwin looked back at the dilapidated cabin one last time. It was a tomb where her old life had died, and a cradle where something new and terrifyingly fragile had just been born. She did not know if she could be the queen this powerful king saw in her. She was still just Silwin, the ghost girl. But as she leaned against Theron's warmth, the steady beat of his heart a comforting rhythm beneath her, a tiny, forgotten seed of hope began to thaw within her frozen soul. The journey to the citadel was a blur. Silwin drifted in and out of a state of exhausted shock, the rhythmic movement of Theron's gait lulling her into a half-sleep. The world around her seemed distant and unreal. The respect of the guards was a constant, unnerving presence. They addressed her as Luna, a title she had only ever heard in whispers, reserved for the most revered of alpha females. Every time they said it, she flinched internally, feeling like an imposter in a stolen life. The citadel, when it came into view, was breathtaking. It was not a castle of cold stone, but a sprawling fortress carved into the heart of a mountain, its towers and ramparts seeming to grow organically from the rock, gleaming with veins of silver and obsidian. It was a place of immense power and ancient beauty. As they passed through the great gates, hundreds of pack members stopped what they were doing to stare. Whispers followed them like the rustling of leaves. They saw their king, the legendary Shadow Wolf, in his pale wolf form, and on his back, a slip of a girl with hair just as white. She could feel their confusion, their curiosity, their judgment. She pulled the hood of her new cloak further over her face, wishing she could disappear. She was escorted to a suite of rooms larger than the entire pack house she had grown up in. Silks and velvets draped the furniture. A fire roared in a marble hearth, and a steaming bath filled with scented oils awaited her. Servants bowed and scraped, their eyes averted, addressing her in hushed, reverent tones. It was all too much. She stood in the center of the opulent room, trembling, feeling smaller and more out of place than ever before. This was a gilded cage, and she was just a common sparrow trapped inside. A stern-faced woman with iron-gray hair and a starched apron entered the room. Her name was Magra, the head of the palace household staff. Unlike the others, her eyes held a distinct chill. "My king has ordered a new wardrobe for you, Luna," she said, her voice clipped and devoid of warmth. She gestured to a line of servants carrying armfuls of exquisite gowns. Magra's gaze swept over Silwin's ragged tunic and thin frame with undisguised disdain. "We will need to get you cleaned up first. You have brought the dirt of the forest into the citadel." The woman's open hostility was, strangely, more familiar than the fawning respect of the others. This, Silwin understood. She was used to being looked down upon, to being seen as dirt. She simply nodded, allowing herself to be led to the bath, her silence and compliance misinterpreted by Magra as weakness. Later, clean and dressed in a simple but elegant gown of deep blue velvet that made her pale skin and hair seem to glow, she was summoned to dine with the king. She found him waiting for her in a private solar, the table set for two before a roaring fire. He had shed his armor and wore a simple gray tunic, but his power was a palpable aura around him. He stood as she entered, his silver eyes warming as they took her in. "You look beautiful, Silwin," he said, his voice a soft rumble. He pulled out a chair for her, a gesture of courtesy that left her flustered. No one had ever done that for her. She sat stiffly, her hands clenched in her lap. The meal was a quiet affair. Tharen did not press her with questions. He simply spoke, telling her about his kingdom, about his people, about the stars visible from the high balconies of the citadel. He spoke of his long life, of the loneliness of the throne, of waiting for a mate he had begun to believe would never come. He was patient, kind, and treated her not as a conquest or a political asset, but as an equal. "Why me?" she finally asked, the question escaping her in a raw whisper. "I don't understand. I am not strong. I am not brave. My wolf is small and weak. I cannot fight. What use is a queen who cannot protect her people?" Tharen set down his fork and leaned forward, his expression serious. "Strength is not only measured in tooth and claw, Silwin. Your bravery was not in fighting, but in choosing to help a stranger when you had nothing. Your strength is in your heart. You have a capacity for compassion that most alphas, in their pride, lose long ago. That is what my people need. A heart to temper my sword, a kindness to guide my strength. That is the use of a queen." His words were a balm on her wounded soul, but the scars of her past were deep. "He said I was worthless," she murmured, unable to meet his gaze. "Lord Valyrias, he said my paleness was a blight." Theron's hand covered hers on the table, his thumb stroking her skin. He was a fool looking at the moon's reflection in a puddle and complaining that it was wet. He saw only the surface. He did not deserve to see the light within you. He paused, his silver eyes intense. "Our appearance is not a curse. It is a mark. The first wolves were born of moonlight and shadow. They were pale, like us. We are closer to the origin of our kind than any of them. It is a sign of ancient blood, of a direct lineage to the goddess herself." He was not just a fool, Silwin. He was blasphemous. She wanted to believe him. Oh, how she wanted to crumble into the safety he offered, to let the mate bond heal her and make her whole. But fear was a stubborn, cold thing. What if he was wrong? What if he too eventually grew tired of her weakness and cast her aside? The pain of a second rejection would not just break her, it would annihilate her. So she held back, a small, frightened part of herself, refusing to surrender, refusing to trust this impossible dream. The next few weeks passed in a strange haze. Tharen was true to his word. He gave her space. He did not push the bond or demand anything of her. He simply included her in his life. She sat in on council meetings, a silent observer at his side. He asked for her opinion on disputes between farmers. on petitions from his subjects. At first, she was too terrified to speak, but he would listen with such genuine interest that she slowly began to offer her thoughts. She found she had a keen sense for fairness, an innate understanding of the common folk's struggles. The court, however, was another matter. Many of the high-ranking nobles were openly skeptical of her. Leading the faction of opposition was a beautiful, sharp-tongued she-wolf named Cyrilda, who had arrived as part of a delegation from a neighboring pack. She had long made it clear she had ambitions to be Theren's queen, and she saw Silwin as nothing more than an inconvenient stray the king had picked up. She and Magra, the head cook, seemed to be allies in making Silwin's life as uncomfortable as possible, with subtle insults, forgotten invitations, and gowns that were just a little too plain. Silwin did her best to ignore them, focusing instead on the unexpected kindness she found. Gideon, the king's beta, became a quiet protector, always ensuring she was treated with the respect Tharen had commanded. Some of the older servants, women who had been at the citadel for decades, saw a goodness in her and would offer her warm smiles and small kindnesses. She was caught between two worlds, the warmth of Theren's acceptance and the cold reality of a court that saw her as an unworthy usurper. Her internal conflict raged on. The bond pulsed between her and Tharen, a constant, tempting warmth, but the icy grip of her past held her back from fully embracing it. She was terrified that the moment she let herself believe she was worthy, the world would prove her wrong. The day of the semi-annual Allegiance Council arrived, a day when the lords of all vassal packs came to the citadel to reaffirm their loyalty to the Shadow Wolf King. It was a day of pomp and politics, and Silwin dreaded it. She would be on display, seated beside Theren's throne, for all the powerful alphas of the continent to see and judge. Tharen had assured her she only needed to be present, that her presence alone was a statement. But to her, it felt like an execution. She sat beside him on a smaller, yet still ornate, chair, her back ramrod straight, her hands clenched so tightly in the folds of her silver gown that her knuckles were white. The great hall was filled with powerful, intimidating figures. She felt their eyes on her, their whispered assessments. She saw Cyrilda preening amongst a group of young alphas, casting scornful glances her way. Silwin focused on a point on the far wall, trying to breathe, trying to become invisible. One by one, the lords came forward to pledge their fealty. Then the herald announced the final delegation, Lord Valyrias of the Blackwood Pack. Silwin's blood turned to ice. She had not known he would be here. Her breath caught in her throat, and the hall seemed to tilt around her. He strode forward, arrogant and handsome as ever, his amber eyes sweeping the room with an air of ownership. He had not seen her yet. He bowed before Tharen, a shallow, barely respectful inclination of his head. "King Tharen," Valyrias began, his voice smooth and confident. "I bring greetings and tribute from the Blackwood." His voice trailed off. His eyes had finally found her. They widened, first in disbelief, then in a flash of fury and possessiveness. The blood drained from his face, replaced by a mottled, angry flush. Silwin could not move. She felt like a rabbit caught in the glare of a wolf. All her progress, all the fragile confidence she had begun to build, crumbled to dust. In that moment, she was not the king's chosen mate. She was just the worthless omega he had thrown away. Valyrias seemed to forget where he was. He straightened up, his shock giving way to a contemptuous sneer. He took a step toward the dais, toward her. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice dangerously loud in the suddenly silent hall. He pointed a shaking finger at Silwin. "What is that thing doing here? That is a reject from my pack. A worthless, cursed omega. She is property of Blackwood, and I want her returned." A collective gasp went through the hall. To so brazenly insult someone seated next to the king, to claim them as property, was an act of unthinkable aggression. Silwin shrank back in her chair, a wave of nausea and terror washing over her. This was it. This was the moment everyone would see the truth. Tharen would see his mistake. He would see her as Valyrias saw her, and he would cast her aside. But Tharen did not move. He did not even look at Valyrias. He simply reached over and placed his hand over hers, his touch a warm, solid anchor in the storm of her fear. Then, he slowly turned his head, and his silver eyes, no longer gentle but blazing with the cold fire of a dying star, fell upon Lord Valyrias. The temperature in the hall dropped by 20 degrees. "You dare," Tharen said. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the silence like a shard of obsidian, filled with a power so immense and terrifying that it made the very stones of the hall tremble. "You dare come into my hall and with a mouthful of filth, address your queen?" Valyrias froze, his arrogance faltering in the face of the king's palpable wrath. "Queen?" he scoffed, though his voice now held a tremor of uncertainty. That is no queen. She is a pale, barren curse. I rejected her for the good of my pack." "You rejected her," Tharen repeated, his voice dangerously soft as he rose slowly to his full, intimidating height. "Because you are a short-sighted, arrogant fool. You stood on a mountain of diamonds and complained you had no pebbles to throw. You had a gift from the goddess herself in your hands, and you threw it in the mud because you lacked the vision to see its worth." Tharen descended the 2 steps of the dais, each footfall echoing like a drumbeat of doom. The force of his alpha command washed over the hall, forcing everyone, including Valyrias, to bow their heads in submission. Valyrias fought it, his body trembling with the effort, but the king's power was absolute. With a strangled cry, Valyrias was forced to his knees, his face pressed against the cold stone floor. Tharen stood over him, a figure of terrible, righteous judgment. "Let me educate you, Lord Valyrias. You did not reject a mere Omega. You rejected Silwin, my fated mate, the future mother of my heirs, the Luna of all Lunas, whose bloodline is older and purer than yours could ever hope to be. You did not just insult a member of your pack. You insulted my wife, you insulted me, and you insulted the goddess who chose her for me." He let the words hang in the air, each one a nail in Valyrias's coffin. "You called her worthless," Tharen continued, his voice dripping with contempt. "This worthless Omega saved my life when I was ambushed and left for dead. She fought off rogues to protect me. She is braver than you have ever been. You called her a curse. Her compassion is the greatest blessing this kingdom will ever know. You are blind, Valyrias, and your blindness will be the ruin of your pack." He raised his voice, addressing the entire assembly. "Let this be a lesson to you all. The measure of a wolf is not the color of their fur or the strength of their arm, but the quality of their heart. Silwin is my queen. Anyone who shows her anything less than the utmost respect will answer directly to me. As for you, Valyrias, your tribute is rejected. Your allegiance is revoked. You and your pack are banished from my lands. Pray I do not decide to wipe the memory of Blackwood from this world entirely. Now get out of my sight." He released his alpha command. Valyrias gasped for air, scrambling backward like a beaten dog. He looked up, his face a mask of terror and disbelief, his eyes pleading. He finally understood the magnitude of his mistake. He had not just lost a potential mate, he had doomed his entire lineage. Guards seized him, dragging him unceremoniously from the hall. The hall was utterly silent. No one dared to move, no one dared to breathe. Tharen turned and walked back to the dais. He looked at Silwin, his expression softening instantly, all the terrifying wrath replaced by a gentle concern. He held out his hand to her. And in that moment, something inside Silwin finally broke. Not with pain, but with release. The dam of fear and self-loathing that had imprisoned her heart for a lifetime shattered into 1,000 pieces. Tears streamed down her face, but they were not tears of sorrow or shame. They were tears of relief, of vindication. He had not just defended her, he had championed her. He had shown not just the court, but her, the truth of her own worth. She placed her trembling hand in his. He pulled her gently to her feet, leading her to the center of the dais, to his own throne. He stood beside her, his arm protectively around her waist, and faced the assembled lords. "Behold your queen," he said, his voice ringing with pride. Silwin looked out at the sea of faces. She saw shock, she saw awe, she saw newfound respect. She saw Cyrilda, her face pale with horror and envy. And for the first time, she did not flinch. She did not look away. She lifted her chin, let the tears fall freely, and met their gazes. She was not a curse. She was a queen. Later that night, after the council had been dismissed and a stunned silence had fallen over the citadel, Silwin stood with Tharen on a private balcony overlooking the moonlit mountains. The air was cold and crisp, but she felt nothing but the warmth of his presence beside her. "Thank you," she said, her voice quiet but steady. He turned to her, his silver eyes luminous in the dark. "For what? For speaking the truth?" "For seeing it," she replied, "when I couldn't see it myself." She took a deep breath, gathering all the remnants of her courage. "For my whole life, I let his words define me. I believed I was broken, unworthy of a mate, of a life. You showed me I was wrong." She stepped closer to him, placing her hand over his heart. She could feel its steady, powerful beat beneath her palm. "The bond. I was afraid of it. I was afraid of being hurt again, but I'm not afraid anymore." She looked up into his handsome face, into the eyes that had seen her, truly seen her, from the very beginning. "Lord Valyrias rejected me," she said, her voice clear and strong. "But that doesn't matter. What matters is my choice." She reached up, her fingers gently tracing the line of his jaw. "I choose you, Tharen. I accept this bond. I accept you, as my mate, my king." A look of profound relief and radiant joy transformed his face. He cradled her face in his hands as if she were the most precious thing in the universe. "Silwin." He breathed her name like a prayer. "You have made me the happiest man on this earth." He lowered his head and kissed her. It was not a kiss of possession or command, but one of reverence and deep, abiding love. It was gentle at first, a question, and she answered by leaning into him, her arms wrapping around his neck. The kiss deepened, and with it, the mate bond flared to life, no longer a tentative flicker but a blazing inferno. It was a torrent of warmth and light, pouring into all the broken places inside her, healing the old wounds, washing away the scars. It felt like lightning and honey, like coming home after a lifetime lost in the cold. It was the feeling of being utterly, completely, and irrevocably whole. Their mating ceremony was held a week later, under the full moon, before the entire kingdom. Silwin stood beside Tharen not as a frightened Omega, but as his equal, his queen. She wore a gown of spun moonlight, her white hair braided with silver threads, and she had never felt more beautiful or more powerful. She no longer saw her appearance as a curse, but as Tharen had taught her to see it, a mark of her ancient, sacred lineage. As queen, she ruled with the compassion that was her greatest strength. She established programs to care for the pack's orphans, to protect its weakest members, to ensure that no one was ever cast out or made to feel worthless for being different. She became beloved by the people, her gentle heart the perfect complement to Theren's unyielding strength. Her reign, with her king by her side, ushered in an age of prosperity and peace the likes of which the werewolf world had never known. The rejected Omega, the ghost girl who had been ready to die in a storm, had found her destiny not in being saved by a king, but in rising to become the queen she was always meant to be. Her rejection had not been an end, but a violent, necessary beginning, a brutal storm that had guided her home to the one soul in the universe who saw the moonlight within her.